Welcome back to the channel, folks, and to another painting guide of sorts. This is a Super Pershing. I'm not going to show you how to paint a whole Super Pershing because there are so many guides that I've already got for painting US armour. This is specifically how to paint the elements of a Super Pershing that can be seen in an image from War Thunder, and that is basically the elements of German camo plates. Now, you may be aware that the armour plating, certainly on the turret of the Super Pershing, was salvaged from destroyed Panthers, which means at some point before it was painted in olive drab, the Super Pershing would have had some plates of German camo on its front. So we're going to recreate that look just for a fun project, and as part of that we're going to use some artistic license and increase the effect by painting the plates of armour that's on the front of the hull too. I've not found any reference that states that the plates on the hull front were salvaged from German armour, but we're going to do it anyway, folks. It's all just a bit of fun. A quick word on how we got to this point. Well, first of all, you can see it's got solid lines of camo here. It's not painted up in the modulated, shaded and highlighted approach that you can see on the standard Pershing. The reason I've not gone for the modulated look is when you have solid bands of colour, you have to modulate one layer, mask it, and then modulate the other layer. But what you have to remember is you cannot see the layer you've just masked, and it can lead to unevenness in the highlights and in the shading. So there's so much else going on with this tank, we're going to just stick with this simple solid two-tone camo and then really make the front of the tank the statement. Now, I'm going to be using an airbrush to apply the camo, but you can do this very easily with a bit of brushwork, a bit of normal brushwork, because it's a very small area that we're working on. That's enough intro, let's get started. Now, before we get started, I'm going to do some protective masking on the already painted surfaces. There will be lots of overspray from the airbrush if I don't do this. Hard to protect the barrel here because it's tight in against the front plate on the turret, but I'll just have to fix that by hand. Otherwise, I can do some protection with the blue tack and peel it off when it's done. Now, here you can see I have sprayed a coat of saddle brown. That's going to be my first camo colour, and then I am going to apply blue tack over it as a mask. You may have seen me doing this before. Now, you can see me using the toothpick here to shape the blue tack and draw it out, pull it back, create the curves that we're after. I'm using this instead of something metal because it's less likely to scratch the surface. Now, if you do make a mistake and do scratch the surface, well, just make sure that area that's damaged isn't covered by the mask, and the next layer of paint is going to fix it. Now, bear in mind that this is a small area. We want to create the shapes that we're after for German camo, but we've got to try and pay a little bit of at least lip service to the reality here is this was cut from a plate of Panther armour, so it should be in scale for that in terms of the size of the shapes, if that makes sense. Now, you can see me applying it across the front here as well. I'm not going to show you the actual airbrushing because that's just me pointing the airbrush and spraying carefully nice smooth layers of paint over it. Not going to show you that, save a bit of time. But important to note is that the edges of the mask should be down tight so that you can get nice tight edges. You're not going to get soft ghost-like feathered edges. We want nice tight solid edges of nice shapes that we spent a bit of time working on because we are masking it in advance of painting it, and therefore being 100% clear on the shapes that we want and the shapes that we're getting. Then repeat the process after you've sprayed the green. Now, I have used Italian Tank Crew as the green colour here. That's a Panzer Aces colour. I find it works really well with the brown. It's got a strong contrast against the brown. Some German camos, the brown and the green, especially after they've been weathered a bit, they're a bit too close to each other, and it becomes difficult to distinguish the two camo patches easily, so I use saddle brown, Italian Tank Crew, and the final colour, the final coat is going to be dark sand, but if you're using dark sand, don't use too much, folks. That is for this late war camo, where most of the camo patches are going to be the brown and the green, and you have to make sure you get that balance right, of course, when you are creating the patches here. Once again, that's what masking is good for, because you're in complete control of the final look before you've even started spraying. Now, I should say you must allow the paint to be touch dry before you spray each layer and before you start to remove. Here I've speeded this right up just to save a bit of time, but unpeeling, basically, uncovering the camo will reveal your work, and then you'll know if you've got it right. Be careful when you are both applying and removing the blue tack, folks, especially if you've got components that you can easily pull off the surface. I try to avoid masking those areas. It might be a little hatch that you've had to glue on, or a fender, maybe a metal fender onto a resin hull, for instance. Try not to mask that if you can, because the chances are you'll pull it off with the blue tack. Sometimes the blue tack doesn't want to come off. Well, that's when a little toothpick can help again, but you've got to be really careful here, folks. Push into the blue tack, don't try to lever it off. Let the blue tack just pull itself away, and then of course you can use other lumps of blue tack just to dab away at it. Catch hold of the sticky bit that's not coming off and lift it off that way. Now, if you do make a few scratches here, folks, it is quite simple to touch it up just with a little bit of brushwork. There's no problem there at all, and you'll get a nice flat finish. That's another one of the good advantages of using an airbrush here. Now we have one more step for the ambush camo on the turret, and that is to put the dots on. And I'm going to use a good old toothpick for this again, folks. So making sure that the paint is nice and wet, but not so wet that when I'm going to touch it to the surface that it's going to flow away. I'm going to get some paint on the tip of the toothpick and then dot yellow into the camo patches and green into the yellow patches. Now, try not to do too much here, folks, because you can really overdo it and it can look as though it's got a bad case of the measles, as one person once described it to me. So keep it within proportion and be patient with each dot, making sure that if the end of the toothpick, if the point is becoming dry, that you are just giving it a quick clean and then refreshing it and starting the process again. As I said before, I'm not going to show you how I paint the whole tank, but it is worthwhile pointing out at this point that I'll be doing a pin wash over the whole vehicle using an acrylic wash, not an enamel wash. This product is like my absolute lifesaver, folks. If it ever goes out of production, I'm going to be heartbroken, because it works just like an enamel wash. Great capillary action, fantastic levels of control, and you can rework it for some time after you have applied it. Though it applies in such a way, with a bit of experience as I have, because I'd use it a lot, that you really don't need to do a lot of cleanup. But it's ammo MIG washes. Before I wash the German armour elements, I need to paint some raw, rusted looking metal plates that were welded onto this sort of Frankenstein armour. It's a nice couple of bits of detail to add to what's already quite an interesting looking front to this vehicle. I'm using Panzer Ace's Dark Rust, and then I will go on later on with some light rust. In addition to the plates on the wings of the turret armour, there is also one sitting above the ball mount for the machine gun. And then I can apply the pin wash to the German armour elements. Really as simple as that, folks. There's not a lot to do here at all. And I should point out that a coat of gloss varnish has been applied all over the kit to help, first of all, with a degree of protection, from general handling, and to just improve the level of capillary action that you can achieve from your wash to allow the thinned wash to flow along and around features. Now, this is something I thought about as I was working through. The plates we're seeing have been cut from either raw steel or from a Panther tank. So they're not going to have painted edges. Remember, this is before it's been resprayed with olive drab. So I'm painting a metallic edge to all of the cut plates. I'm going to tone it down a bit as I go, but basically just use a metallic colour to paint all the exposed edges so it looks as though it's freshly cut steel. And here I'm brightening up those rusty metal plates by just using some light rust colour from Panzeraces. The first coat is going to be quite patchy, you know, semi-opaque, put on quite wet, and then I'll add some more opaque lines to it. But remember here folks, to keep the cut edges on these rusty plates with that same metallic finish as the camoed plates. Now, just as we need to remember that the plates have been cut from larger pieces of metal and have exposed metal edges, we also have to remember that they've been cut from a tank and the inside of that metal plate would have been painted white. Makes sense, doesn't it? It might look a bit daft, but it kind of makes sense. So I'm using some off-white, and I'm only going to go in here once and apply one coat. It's not going to be an opaque, smooth coat, folks. It doesn't need to be, because it's going to be quite messy anyway from the inside of a tank, especially after it's been cut off, reworked and so on. Now, if this worries you, working so close to a completed and finished surface, you can use a little bit of paper and slide it in between the surface that you want to work on and hold it against the surface that you want to keep safe, and then work your brush in that way. Now I'm going to go back to my wash and just tone down those cut edges so the metallic paint is still visible, but it's not super bright. We don't want it to stand out too strongly, we just want it to be there as an element to make sense of what we're seeing. If you dab at the wash as it's drying, it can help create the illusion of a surface, you know, perhaps uneven cuts. And then to finish off the armour plating, I am going to apply some streaks, and just some weathering. You could also do some chipping here. I wouldn't do it on the ambush camo because there's so much going on there, but on this front plate you could do some chipping. But I'm just going to stick to some streaks, and I'm using the same wash once again, just applied thicker, you know, straight out of the bottle, so to speak. And that's us done, folks. You know, in reality, the Yanks would have been spraying this with their olive drab before sending it out into battle, but on our wargame tables, that one Persian you can have in your list can look like this if you want. Now, I've got some stills coming up at the end, and also some stills of just ordinary Pershings. Hopefully you found it interesting. Maybe you want to try this yourself, maybe give you some ideas. But anyway, thank you for watching. As always, thanks for subscribing as well, or dropping into the channel from time to time if you do. If you'd like to help support the channel, help us build it up and keep on top of the new tutorials that are coming along all the time, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button, and that means we'll definitely see you all on the next one.